Here's the walkthrough of the planning final exam portion where you are reviewing a lesson plan. Same as we did before. This is just a refresher because we haven't done one in a while. You're going to get a lesson plan. You also have some additional elements that you can look at, but those are just supplemental for you to make your decision about whether things are aligned or not. As we look through the first stage, first question is alignment. To what degree does this lesson plan possess alignment? 1, you have multiple misalignments. 2, there's one part that's bad, but everything else is good. 3, all portions of the assessment are in alignment. So again, what we're talking about here, we're talking about the objectives, the materials, the instruction, and the assessments. The objective here is that they're going to be able to identify 4 elements of a fiction story: character, setting, problem, solution, when reading a new short story. So this is an application level goal. Materials and preparation, right? You have the elements of a story circle chart, so that's a scaffold that people can use. There's the story of the Frog Prince, and 1 copy of the elements of a short story sorted out. And so this is what it looks like. You can take a gander at it and get a better idea. But basically, right, you have these different cards and you're trying to identify what the different parts of a story are. Some practice there. As we go through, right, so the materials seem to be in alignment, right? You have these elements, you have a new story that they're going to read, you have some other new examples to help them practice, so everything seems good here. You have the introduction, talk about the elements, talk about the different parts, the characters, setting, problems, solution, great, all in alignment. Guided practice, they're going to watch the short video and they are going to use that as an example. So this is one thing, right? Later on when we talk about whether or not they use student assets, they voted on a short video, they've picked this one, and they watched it, and they can use this as something that they all have shared, enjoyed, to talk about. As we go through independent work time, now they're given a new story, The Frog Prince, with the blank elements of a story circle chart to each student. So now they're going to use that to identify the different parts. We have supports and enrichments, right? Supports provide a partially completed worksheet for students during independent practice. So you might fill out some of them so they can get an idea and they can just focus on other parts. Enrichments, they can apply the skills to find elements and additional stories of their choice that are provided if they go through really fast. Also can introduce the concept of plot to extend one more element of a story. So good supports, good enrichments. Assessments, during instruction, monitor student responses to each example. During guided practice, identify and provide support for students who are having trouble. Finally, have students independently complete the circle chart for the Frog Prince as the summative assessment. So in this case, right, when we're looking at this, pretty easy. All portions of the assessment are in alignment. If you wanted to think of what a justification might look like, you need to make sure that you mention the learning objectives. Oops, my keyboard keeps typing 2 A's. Learning objectives, materials, instruction, supports, and assessments are all working towards the application goal. And that's all you would really need to write. Now, if there was 1 out of line or 2 out of line, then you need to tell me what's out of line. Say the instruction was geared more towards a recall level goal, or the assessment was geared more towards a recall level goal, even though the goal itself was an application goal. Going to the next one. Learning progression. To what extent does the lesson follow a learning progression towards the stated objectives? So the question here is, right, how does the teacher stage things so they are going to succeed at the final goal? She starts easy with defining things, right? Introducing the ideas. The guided practice, they're going to walk through this together and kind of guide them as they need help, see if they can do it themselves, and they're going to do it independently, and so on, having differentiation and enrichments. Finally, doing that last thing during the independent work time. In this case, I would give this a 3, that starting at a very basic level of basic definitions, giving examples, applying it as a class, and then doing independent work is a very good scaffolded way, and that's what I would write down in here regarding my justification. I'm not going to take the time to write it, just listen back to hear what I said. Meaningful context. To what extent does the lesson provide an authentic real-world context for students? So in this case here, again, we are looking for some reason why identifying the elements of a story is an important life skill. Here, there's an explanation that an element is an essential part of something, and every fiction story has the same key elements. So then when they are telling stories to their friends, they usually have these 4 parts. If you want to be a really good storyteller, you have each of these 4 parts in your story. So in this case, I would say, yeah, I think that that's good enough to get a 3. I can see some people going back to a 2, but most people like telling stories to their friends. It's a skill that most people want to have. I don't know anybody who desires to be a poor storyteller, and when you are a good storyteller, you become more popular, people enjoy you more, people laugh at your jokes more, and you have a better connection and so on. So this is a good real-world context that's provided for why you would need it, and that's what you would put in the justification. Differentiated supports. To what extent does the lesson provide supports and extensions? Here we have supports and enrichments. As we stated, or as I stated earlier, the supports do kind of scaffold it, provide some extra structure, reduce the task, and that I can see some people saying, well, that's really just doing some of it for them and giving them less to do, and that's actually going to hinder them from showing that they can do the whole story. And so maybe providing a simpler story or an abbreviated version of the story, or some things with bolded text, things like that, additional examples or charts might be better. So I can see somebody going and giving it a 2 based on that. But that's what you would have to say, that the support was not really a great support because it undermines students meeting the lesson objective for those reasons I just mentioned. The enrichment, however, right, applying it to additional stories and introducing a new element, that's definitely good. And if you are okay with the support, the enrichment works as well, so then you could give it a 3. Again, I can see people giving it a 2, but make sure that if you do, you justify why you did so. Targeting misconceptions. To what extent does a teacher anticipate and address misconceptions? So here again, the question is, what are some misconceptions that you might have in the elements of a story? As we go through this, right, and really we're looking for misconceptions in the introduction and the explicit instructions. Sometimes it'll be in the guided practice, but it won't usually be in the independent working time ever. So you're looking for any kind of addressing of misconceptions in these sections. So in this introduction where they're giving the rationale, not really targeting any of the misconceptions there. You have them think about a familiar story like Hansel and Gretel, maybe not Hansel and Gretel because not all students know that story. So you don't want to find some or one that everybody would resonate with. As you go through, she's giving a basic description, and she does it twice with 2 stories. And there's no real targeting of misconceptions there. Students voted on a short video last week. Blank copy, elements of a story again, right? And got the story of the Frog Prince. Okay. So here, there is no specific mention of targeting misconceptions, right? A misconception might be that when they're talking about the problem or solution, maybe students oftentimes think that the solution always has to be a good thing, or it has to be a happy ending. Most stories have that, but not all stories do. So that could be a misconception. Resolutions just means it's resolved. Sometimes it means the hero dies, right? or Bambi gets shot, or Bambi's mom gets shot, Bambi didn't get shot. Don't even know if Bambi's a valid reference anymore. It's a movie about a deer. I haven't seen it in about 40 years, so I don't really remember what it's about. Okay, so no misconceptions mentioned. When you give it a 1, your justification is always the same. It's just that the student doesn't deliberately go out of their way to address a potential point of confusion. Question 11, using student assets. To what extent does the user use what the students bring to the table? So here, right, we are looking for prior learning and personal assets. Prior academic learning is, she definitely uses personal assets, but the question is, with the bounding video, but the question is, does she use previous learning? Is there a mention of what they have learned before? And so here, when we're talking about the key terms in the initial explanation, not really drawing on previous lessons. If you drew on lessons of stories you read as a class prior to this, that would work, at least in some way. But, talking about what they have learned about characters, or the idea of, if they've talked about describing different elements of a story in a different way, or what fiction is, or different types of fiction, that would work. But there's not really direct mention of activating prior knowledge here. Definitely student assets, but no prior knowledge. And the justification here, you would put in, the teacher uses personal assets by incorporating a video that the students voted on as one they wanted to watch, and uses that experience that they've shared as a springboard into the lesson. But there is no mention of any prior academic skills. Finally, we have planning assessments, right? That's our last one. We look at this. We see that there's assessment during instruction, during guided practice, and at the end. And they're all well aligned with what the students are doing at the time. Down here in the justification, you would indicate that, yes, there are multiple assessments at different portions. They're existing throughout, and they are well aligned with the learning objective, or the portion of the lesson that the teacher is assessing at the time. And that's about it. So the next video will be on instruction, and then there'll be one more on assessment.